If you've ever poured your entire soul into building something, only to watch the person you trust most try to burn it to the ground for the insurance money, then you know exactly how I feel. If you haven't, then stick around, because I'm about to tell you a story about friendship, betrayal, and the cold, hard math of consequence. My name is Reed, and this is how I dismantled my business partner's empire with nothing more than a calculator and a spine he never knew I had. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a partner, in business or in life, who turned out to be a complete stranger. And while you're down there, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what comes next. It all started, as these things often do, with a number that didn't make sense. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet, sterile evening in our downtown office, when the only sounds were the hum of the servers and the distant sigh of traffic 11 floors below. Our firm, Sterling and Thorne Architecture, was my life's work, or more accurately, our life's work, mine and Kevin's. Kevin Thorne was the Sterling, I was the Thorne. He was the charisma, the rainmaker, the guy who could sell a glass of water to a drowning man. I was the architect, the guy who made sure the elegant skyscraper he sold didn't collapse into a pile of rebar and regret. We were a perfect partnership, or so I'd told myself for 15 years. That night, I was reconciling the quarterly expenses, a task I'd taken over years ago, not because I enjoyed it, but because it was necessary. A kind of financial hygiene. I was scrolling through a PDF of credit card statements when I saw it, a charge for $5,000 to a company called Render Lux Studios. I frowned. We had an in-house rendering team, a very good one. Marcus, a kid I'd mentored myself, could make a digital building look more real than the one you were standing in. On the rare occasion we outsourced, we used one of two trusted firms in Chicago. I'd never heard of Render Lux. I did a quick search. Nothing, no website, no portfolio, just a generic business registration in a state 3 time zones away. A little knot of cold dread, a feeling I hadn't felt in 5 years, began to form in my stomach. It was a ghost, a familiar phantom from the past. I opened the main server, navigating to the project folders. If we'd paid for a rendering, it had to be for a current project. I checked them all. Nothing. No files from an outside firm. No mention of Render Lux in any project correspondence. The knot in my stomach tightened. This was how the last time started. A small discrepancy. A loose thread that, when pulled, unraveled everything. I leaned back in my chair, the expensive leather groaning in the silence. I looked across the darkened office to Kevin's space. It was a testament to his personality. Sleek, minimalist, a massive mahogany desk that was always immaculately clear, save for a laptop and a photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. My own desk was a landscape of trace paper, architectural scales, and half-finished models. His was a stage. Mine was a workshop. I forced myself to be rational. Maybe it was a mistake, a miscategorized expense. But I knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that bypasses logic, that it wasn't. I went back to the accounting software. I searched for Render Lux. And there it was, not one invoice, but 6. One every month for the last 6 months. Each for $5,000, $30,000. A cold sweat prickled on my neck. I clicked open the first invoice. It was a generic template, amateurish almost. The kind of thing you could whip up in a word processor in 5 minutes. The project listed was the Hawthorne Project. We didn't have a Hawthorne project. My heart was hammering now, a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. This wasn't just a loose thread. This was the blueprint for a betrayal. I started digging deeper, my fingers flying across the keyboard, driven by a terrible, sickening sense of purpose. I cross-referenced payment dates with Kevin's calendar. The payments always went through on a Friday. On 3 of those Fridays, Kevin had scheduled client outreach lunches with clients I knew for a fact were out of the country. He was creating a digital alibi, a paper trail of plausible deniability. This was different from before. The first time, 5 years ago, it was desperation. He'd fallen into the dark, seductive world of online day trading. He was chasing losses, doubling down, using the company's operating account as his personal ATM. When the market turned, it nearly sank us. We were weeks from bankruptcy. I found out when our suppliers started calling, screaming about unpaid bills. I remember the confrontation. He'd collapsed in this very office, sobbing, a broken man confessing his addiction, his shame. He was pathetic, and my anger was diluted by a stupid, misguided sense of pity. I was the strong one, the stable one. I could fix it. And I did. I liquidated my personal investment portfolio. I took out a second mortgage on my house. I went, hat in hand, to our creditors and our clients, and I begged for their patience. I used every ounce of my reputation, the reputation I had built on competence and reliability, to vouch for him. For us, I put the firm, our firm, on my back and carried it out of the fire. And when it was over, I forgave him. We shook hands. He promised it would never happen again, and we rebuilt. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he had learned. Now, staring at the fake invoices on my screen, the sick feeling wasn't just dread. It was the icy, clear certainty of a fool who has been played twice. This wasn't the frantic scrabbling of an addict. This was methodical. It was calculated. This was a plan. The money wasn't being lost in the digital ether of the stock market. It was being moved, siphoned, but to where, and for what? The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place around 2 a.m. I was running a deep search on our server, looking for any file, any fragment that contained the word Hawthorne, and I found it. It wasn't in a project folder. It was buried in the temp files of Kevin's own machine, in a cached email I should not have been able to see. It was an email to a web developer. The subject line was Draft Site for Hawthorne Design Group. Attached was a logo. It was sleek, modern, and incorporated a stylized letter T for Thorn, and below the logo was a list of projects for the portfolio section. It was a list of our biggest, most successful projects. Our clients. He wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing our history. He was stealing my work. He was building a new firm, a side project, funded by our money, built on our reputation, with the sole purpose of poaching our clients and leaving me with the hollowed-out shell of the company I had already saved once. There would be no forgiveness this time. There would be no pity. The first time was a mistake, a weakness. This was a declaration of war. And in war you don't forgive. You win. I closed the laptop, the office now completely dark save for the faint glow of the city outside my window. The knot in my stomach was gone, replaced by something cold, hard, and heavy. It felt like steel. I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning I wouldn't call Kevin. I would call a forensic accountant. I drove home in a state of suspended animation. The city lights smeared across my windshield, the familiar streets of my neighborhood feeling alien, like a set for a play in which I was an unwilling actor. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. The betrayal wasn't a hot, raging fire. It was a block of ice expanding in my chest, cracking ribs. It was the sheer, calculated premeditation of it all that was so staggering. The monthly invoices, the fake project names, the slow, patient siphoning. He had been doing this for half a year, sitting in meetings with me, clapping me on the back, talking about our future while methodically gutting the company from the inside. I finally went inside. My wife Sarah was asleep. I was grateful for that. I couldn't have faced her, couldn't have borne the "I told you so" that she was far too kind to ever say, but that would hang in the air between us nonetheless. She had been my rock during the first crisis, but her support was tinged with a deep, unwavering skepticism about Kevin. She saw the charisma not as a gift, but as a tool, a mask. "People like that don't change, Reed," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, as I was signing the papers for the second mortgage. "They just change their tactics." I had dismissed it as cynicism, the natural caution of someone who didn't understand the bond, the history, that Kevin and I shared. We'd started this thing in our late 20s, with nothing but 2 drafting tables and a shared dream. How could she understand that? Now her words echoed in the silent house, a perfect damning prophecy. I went to my study. It was my sanctuary, a room lined with books on structural engineering and architectural theory. On one wall were framed blueprints of my favorite projects, a library that seemed to float on a cushion of light, a community center that had won a national award, a private home that cantilevered over a cliffside, a design so daring the client had initially thought it was impossible. My work, my legacy, and Kevin was trying to steal it, to paste it onto his new website like a cheap decal. That's when the memories started to flood in, unbidden. The flashback to 5 years ago wasn't just a single event, it was a season of unrelenting misery. I remembered the phone call from Kevin, his voice choked with a panicky, synthetic-sounding sob. He'd told me to come to the office, that it was an emergency. I had been at my son's soccer game. I remembered the look on my son's face as I told him I had to leave. Disappointment, quickly masked. He was used to it. I found Kevin not just crying, but hyperventilating, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a day. He couldn't even articulate it at first, just pushed his laptop toward me. On the screen was his trading account, a sea of red arrows, all pointing down, a balance that was massively, terrifyingly negative, and next to it, the tab for our firm's primary operating account. The number there was near zero. He had been using the company's cash flow as collateral for his margin calls. He'd bet the entire firm on a tech stock that had tanked overnight. The days that followed were a blur of damage control. I met with our bank manager, a man I'd known for years, who looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I had to explain that my partner, my charismatic, brilliant partner, had essentially been gambling with the payroll. I had to call our structural engineers, our material suppliers, and convince them not to place liens on our projects. Every conversation was a fresh humiliation. I was no longer Reed Thorne, award-winning architect. I was the responsible half of a failing enterprise, the cleanup crew for a fiscal bomb. Throughout it all, Kevin was a ghost. He'd show up, his eyes red-rimmed, and offer these pathetic, blubbering apologies. He'd talk about the pressure, the thrill, the addiction. He made it sound like a disease that had happened to him, not a series of choices he had made. And the worst part, the most galling part in retrospect, I bought it. I fell for the performance, because forgiving him was easier than the alternative. The alternative was admitting that 15 years of my life, the partnership I had built my entire professional identity around, was a lie. It was easier to believe in a story of redemption than a story of being a fool. So I did the unthinkable. I cashed out stocks I had been saving for my children's education. I leveraged the home my family lived in. I poured my own financial blood back into the veins of the company. Sarah had fought me on it. We'd had the biggest fight of our marriage. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. She saw Kevin for what he was, a black hole of need, dressed up in a $1,000 suit. I saw him as my friend, my brother in arms, who had made a terrible mistake. I chose my friend over my wife's wisdom, and for 5 years, it seemed like I had made the right choice. We rebuilt, business boomed. We landed the Sterling Developments account, a massive city-defining project that put us on the map. Kevin, seemingly chastened and grateful, was better than ever. He was a schmoozing machine, his near-death experience giving his story a compelling second act, the comeback kid. And I was the silent partner, the steady hand on the tiller, the one who made sure the designs were brilliant and the building stood up. It worked. I let myself believe it worked. I let the scar tissue form over the wound and told myself it was stronger than before. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. I had paid a high price to keep our competence intact, and I thought the investment had paid off. Now, sitting in my study, the warmth of that delusion evaporated, leaving a chilling clarity. The first betrayal had been a crime of passion, of weakness. This was a crime of calculation, of contempt. He hadn't just stolen from the company, he had stolen from me, personally. He had taken the money I had bled to save us and used it to finance my own destruction. He was using the second mortgage on my house to build his new office. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was what finally solidified my resolve. My anger wasn't hot and explosive, it was cold and dense. It was a block of granite settling into my gut. There would be no confrontation this time, no tearful confessions, no second chances. The redemption narrative was over. This would be a story of consequences, a simple, elegant, and brutal equation where his actions would lead to a perfectly balanced and unavoidable result. I thought about his plan: launch a new firm, poach our clients. He would approach them with a story, a carefully crafted narrative. He'd probably paint me as the past, the stodgy old guard, while he was the dynamic future. He would use my work as his portfolio, taking credit for my designs. He thought because he was the face, people would assume he was also the mind. He had made a classic amateur's mistake. He mistook the sales pitch for the product. My catalyst for action wasn't a single moment, but the slow, dawning realization of his ultimate goal. He wasn't just leaving. He was planning to erase me, to rewrite our shared history with him as the sole author. That was something I could not, and would not, allow. I stood up and walked over to the architectural model of the Sterling Tower, our biggest project. It was a complex, beautiful thing of acrylic and basswood. I ran my finger along a delicate truss. I had designed this. I had solved the engineering problems. My DNA was in its structure, and I would be damned if I let a thief claim it as his own. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I called in, telling Kevin's assistant I had a stomach bug. A plausible excuse. Kevin himself got on the phone, his voice dripping with that cloying counterfeit concern he was so good at. "Take it easy, buddy. Rest up. I'll hold down the fort." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was holding down the fort while tunneling out from under the foundations. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to a name I'd kept from the last time. A recommendation from my shell-shocked accountant 5 years ago. Elena Vargas, a forensic accountant. Back then I hadn't needed her. It was a confession, not a mystery. This time I needed a map of the crime. Her website was stark and professional. "We provide clarity in complex financial disputes." I called the number. A woman answered, her voice crisp and devoid of fluff. I explained, in broad strokes, that I was a partner in a firm and suspected my other partner of embezzling funds to stand up a competing entity. I expected a series of qualifying questions, a gatekeeping secretary. Instead, she just said, "My office, 1 p.m. Bring your laptop and any documentation you have. Don't use your work email to confirm." Then she gave me an address in a nondescript office park 20 miles away and hung up. I liked her already. I spent the morning gathering my digital evidence, the fake invoices from Render Lux, the server logs showing Kevin's after-hours access, the cached email with the Hawthorne Design Group branding. I saved everything to a secure encrypted flash drive. Every click, every download, felt deliberate, like I was assembling the components of a very precise machine. Elena Vargas's office was as no-nonsense as her phone manner. The room contained a desk, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard. No plants, no inspirational posters. Elena herself was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to be constantly assessing, calculating. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She pointed to a chair, and I sat. I laid it all out. The story of the first betrayal, my bailout, the 5 years of peace, and my discovery from the night before. I handed her the flash drive. She plugged it into her own machine, and her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face impassive as she scanned the files. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask a single question until I was done. The silence stretched. Finally, she looked up from her screen, her eyes locking onto mine. "Mr. Thorne, what you have here is a strong indication of fraud. But an indication isn't proof. An email to a web developer is good. Invoices from a shell company are better. What we need is to build an indisputable narrative of fact. We need to follow the money, not just to the shell company, but from the shell company into his personal accounts, or into the accounts of his new venture. She walked over to the whiteboard. "This is what he's done," she said, drawing a diagram. A box labeled Sterling and Thorn, with an arrow pointing to a box labeled Render Lux. "He's created a cutout, standard procedure for this kind of thing. He controls Render Lux. He generates a plausible-looking invoice, submits it to his own company, and then, as a partner, he approves the payment. He's effectively asking himself for money, and then telling himself it's okay to take it. What we do now," she continued, her voice gaining a certain predatory energy, "is we get a court order for the bank records of Render Lux. We'll see exactly who owns the account and where the money is going. Is it paying for his mortgage, his car? Is it paying the incorporation fees for Hawthorne Design Group? Every dollar he spent is another nail." Her confidence was infectious, a cool balm on my raw anger. This was a world of process and evidence, a world I understood. "How long will this take?" I asked. "To get the full picture, the complete, airtight report that a district attorney would love to see. 4 to 6 weeks, maybe less. Your partner isn't a criminal mastermind. He's an arrogant amateur. They always leave a trail." She paused. "The real question, Mr. Thorne, is what is your desired outcome? Do you want to see him in jail, or do you just want him gone?" The question hung in the air. Forgiveness was off the table, but prison, despite everything, the thought of Kevin in a jumpsuit caused a flicker of something uncomfortable in my gut, a vestige of that old stupid loyalty. "I want to protect my firm," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "No," Elena said, her gaze unwavering. "Your firm is already compromised. He's building an ark with its pieces. You need to decide if you want to sink his ark or if you want to build a better one and let his run aground on its own. The evidence we build will allow you to do either. The choice of how to use it will be yours." I left her office with a clear plan. We would proceed with the full audit. She would build the case piece by painstaking piece. My job was to go back to the office and act as if nothing was wrong. I had to be the same old Reed, the reliable, slightly boring workhorse. I had to give Kevin enough rope, not just to hang himself, but to braid a full-size noose. My secret weapon wasn't just Elena's audit. It was the one asset Kevin had always underestimated: my relationships. He was the schmoozer, the one who bought the expensive lunches, but I was the one who sat with the clients for hours, poring over blueprints, listening to their needs, solving their problems. He sold them the dream. I made it a reality. Trust is an asset you can't list on a balance sheet, and my accounts were full. I started a quiet campaign. I began with Marcus, my star designer. He was brilliant, ambitious, and I knew he was frustrated. Kevin treated him like a glorified draft horse, all work and no credit. I caught him in the break room one afternoon. I didn't mention my discovery. I just asked him, "What do you think of the direction we're headed, Marcus?" Creatively. He hesitated, looking around to see if anyone was listening. "Honestly, Reed, it feels like we're all about the pitch now, not the design. Kevin's more interested in the client's golf handicap than their structural requirements. We haven't pushed the envelope on a design in a year." I nodded slowly. "I feel the same way. I feel like the architecture is becoming secondary to the brand." A look of immense relief washed over his face. He'd found a kindred spirit. "Exactly. I've been working on some conceptual stuff for the new Sterling Tower edition, things that could really set us apart, but Kevin just isn't interested." "I am," I said simply. "Show them to me." That was the beginning of my own secret side project. Marcus and I started meeting after hours, not in the office but at my home studio. He brought his conceptual sketches, and they were breathtaking. We started refining them, building on them, creating a vision for the Sterling project that was light years ahead of the safe, predictable path Kevin wanted to take. I was building my own arc, crewed by the very talent Kevin was ignoring. Marcus was my first mate. He was loyal to the work, not to the name on the door. He became my eyes and ears in the office, a source of quiet intelligence. He'd tell me about Kevin's long, confidential phone calls, the unusual number of lunches with our top-tier clients. He confirmed my fears. Kevin was actively laying the groundwork for a mass client exodus. My other key asset was Richard Sterling himself, the head of Sterling Developments. He was our white whale, the client who had made us. He was an old-school titan of industry, a man in his 70s who had built his empire from the ground up. He was sharp, demanding, and had zero tolerance for bullshit. Kevin thought he had him in his pocket because they played golf together. But I knew Richard. He didn't care about your backswing. He cared about your building. He cared about vision and execution. I arranged a meeting with Richard, ostensibly to review some minor zoning variances for the tower. I didn't invite Kevin. When Richard's assistant asked why, I simply said, "This is a technical review of foundation-level schematics. I don't want to waste Kevin's time with the granular details." It was the perfect excuse. I met Richard not in a boardroom, but on the construction site of his current project. We stood there, two men in hard hats, looking up at the skeleton of a building. I didn't talk about variances. I unrolled the conceptual drawings Marcus and I had been working on. "Richard," I said, "I have a new vision for the next phase. Something bolder, something that will make this tower not just a building but a landmark." He looked at the drawings, his experienced eyes tracing the lines, taking in the innovative use of materials, the ambitious cantilevers. He was silent for a long time. I could see the gears turning. This was the language he understood. Not sales pitches, but steel and glass and vision. "This is brilliant, Reed," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "Why am I seeing this for the first time now? Why hasn't Kevin mentioned any of this?" I looked him in the eye. "Because Kevin thinks a landmark is something you name after yourself. I think it's something you build for the ages." I didn't say another word about my partner. I didn't need to. I had planted the seed. I had re-established my own value, completely independent of the firm's brand. I was no longer one half of Sterling and Thorne. I was Reed Thorne, the architect. Richard Sterling would remember that. He was my hidden leverage, the king on my chessboard. Kevin was playing checkers, moving his pieces around loudly, thinking he was winning. He had no idea I was setting up a checkmate. Elena was building the gallows. I was just letting Kevin choose the time of his own execution. The day he finally made his move on Richard Sterling, I would be ready. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare, fought in the silent trenches of corporate decorum. I played the part of the oblivious partner to perfection. I was Reed, the dependable, slightly dull engine of the firm. I kept my head down. I turned out my designs. I nodded along in partner meetings as Kevin spouted his usual optimistic bullshit about synergy and leveraging our brand identity. Inside I was a coiled spring, every nerve ending tingling with a cold, thrilling sense of purpose. Elena's weekly updates were my secret sustenance. They arrived as encrypted emails to my personal account, usually late on a Friday night. Each one was another brick in the wall of evidence she was building. She had successfully subpoenaed the bank records for Render Lux Studios. It was exactly as we'd suspected. The company was a sole proprietorship registered to a post office box, with Kevin Thorne as the only signatory. The $30,000 from our firm had gone in, and then it had flowed right back out. $10,000 had gone to a high-end web development firm in San Francisco. $5,000 had gone to the Delaware Secretary of State to register the Hawthorne Design Group LLC. The rest, a little under $15,000, had been transferred directly into Kevin's personal brokerage account, the same one he'd used to nearly bankrupt us 5 years earlier. He hadn't just relapsed, he'd weaponized his addiction. He was using our money to gamble again, probably to raise more seed capital for his new venture. The sheer, stupid, repetitive nature of his self-destruction was almost poetic. Meanwhile, Marcus was my periscope into Kevin's world. His reports were brief and factual. Kevin had a 2-hour lunch with the VP from Crestview Holdings. He just spent an hour on the phone with a commercial real estate broker. I heard him mention a lease on a new office space downtown. He's been printing out our entire client contact list. He was a man building his escape raft in plain sight, so blinded by his own arrogance that he couldn't imagine anyone was smart enough to see the hammer and nails in his hand. The atmosphere in the office began to shift. It was subtle, but palpable. The best people, the senior designers and project managers I had personally hired and trained over the years, could sense the change in the weather. Kevin's focus was entirely on sales and glad-handing, while the actual architectural work was being neglected. Deadlines were getting crunched, and his feedback on complex designs was becoming increasingly superficial. He'd walk by a desk, glance at a complex structural model, and say something like, "Looks great, let's make it pop," and then walk away. It was an insult to their craft. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it, and we were losing it, by design. My first overt move was as quiet as a key turning in a lock. I knew from Marcus that Kevin was planning to make his big pitch to Richard Sterling at the end of the month. He'd booked the most expensive steakhouse in the city, no doubt planning to unveil his Hawthorne design group with a flourish, positioning it as a dynamic new spin-off. He was going to try and poach his own company's flagship client. The week before his planned dinner, I made my move. I didn't go to Richard Sterling. I went to the two other senior architects in the firm, David Chen and Maria Flores. Like Marcus, they were brilliant, dedicated, and utterly disillusioned with Kevin's leadership. I invited them for a beer after work at a quiet old bar far from our usual haunts. I didn't lay out the whole sordid story of the embezzlement. That was my trump card, not to be played until the final hand. Instead, I spoke to their professional pride. "I'm sure you felt it." I started swirling the amber liquid in my glass. The shift, the feeling that we're becoming a marketing firm that happens to do architecture. David, a quiet, meticulous man who was our firm's foremost expert on sustainable design, nodded slowly. "It's been frustrating." I presented the new passive heating system for the museum project, and Kevin's only note was whether we could get a celebrity to endorse it. Maria, who was our lead project manager and the most organized human being I'd ever met, chimed in. "He's all sizzle, no steak, and the clients are starting to notice." The team from Crestview called me last week, confused. Kevin had promised them a completion date that is physically impossible to meet. I had to walk them back from a cliff he'd led them to. I let their grievances hang in the air. Then I laid out my vision. Not a vision of revenge, but of restoration. "I'm going to be making a change soon," I said, my voice low and even. "I'm planning to start a new firm, one that is built on the principles we started with, that the architecture comes first, that the work is the star, not the salesman. A place where talent is nurtured and competence is the only currency that matters." I didn't ask them to join me. I didn't need to. I saw the look in their eyes. It was a mixture of hope and relief. I was offering them a life raft, and they were ready to jump. "I'm not asking for a decision now," I said. "I just wanted you to know, so you can make your own plans. When the time comes, you'll know where to find me." The next day, the first tremors of the earthquake began. Kevin, completely unaware, walked into the office with his usual breezy confidence, but his world was about to crack. Richard Sterling called the office asking for me. Kevin, eager to intercept, took the call himself. Marcus, whose desk was just outside Kevin's glass-walled office, gave me the play-by-play via instant message a few minutes later. "Marcus, Sterling is on the phone with Kevin. He sounds annoyed." "Me about what?" "Marcus, Sterling is asking about the new design concepts for the tower, the ones you showed him. He's asking for a formal presentation to his board next week." "Marcus," Kevin is completely flat-footed. He's stammering. He's saying he needs to circle back and align with the creative team. "Marcus, oh, this is bad." Sterling just said, "Don't bother aligning, Kevin. Just make sure Reed is there. It's his vision I'm buying." "Marcus," he just hung up on him. The silence from Kevin's office was deafening. He didn't emerge for an hour. When he finally did, his face was pale, the cocksure swagger gone, replaced by a tight, anxious energy. He stalked over to my desk. "What the hell was that with Sterling?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "What new vision? Why did you go behind my back?" I looked up from my drafting table, my expression one of mild professional surprise. Behind your back. Richard and I were on site. We started brainstorming. It was a creative breakthrough. Isn't that what we want? To be pushing the envelope for our biggest client? He stared at me, searching my face for some sign of duplicity. He found none. All he saw was Reed, the boring architect, who had accidentally stumbled into a good idea. He couldn't comprehend that it was a deliberate strategic move. His ego wouldn't allow it. From now on, all communication with Sterling goes through me, he said, his voice tight with fury. I'm the relationship manager on that account. We can't have you going rogue and confusing the client. Of course, Kevin, I said calmly. Whatever you think is best. I turned back to my work, but I could feel his eyes on me. The panic had set in. He had lost control of the narrative with our most important client. He had planned to approach Richard as a savior, offering him a path away from a supposedly stagnant firm. Instead, Richard was now asking me to save him from Kevin's stagnation. The silent takeover had begun. He thought he was the predator. He was just now realizing he was the prey. The exodus began on a Monday morning. It was not a chaotic stampede, but a quiet, coordinated, and utterly devastating maneuver. At 9 a.m., an email from Maria Flores landed in Kevin's inbox with a CC to me and HR. It was her resignation, effective in 2 weeks. It was polite, professional, and completely opaque, citing a desire for new challenges. Kevin was annoyed, but not panicked. He saw Maria as a replaceable cog, an administrator. He didn't grasp that she was the central nervous system of our entire project delivery process. She was the one who translated our designs into buildable, on-budget realities. Without her, the firm's execution would grind to a halt. At 9:30 a.m., David Chen's email arrived. The same polite tone, the same 2 weeks' notice. Now Kevin's annoyance turned to visible anger. He stormed out of his office and marched to David's desk. What is this? Are you and Maria in on this together? Did you get a better offer from some eco-friendly boutique firm? David, a man of profound calm, simply looked up from his monitor. It was just time for a change, Kevin. I wish you and Reed all the best. The use of my name was a subtle, deliberate twist of the knife. The real blow, the one that finally cracked Kevin's facade of control, landed at 10 a.m. It was from Marcus. It was the same template, the same 2 weeks' notice. But Marcus was different. Marcus was our rising star, the future of the firm's design talent. Kevin had just been boasting about him in a trade magazine interview, calling him a homegrown prodigy. Kevin's face went from red to a sickly ashen gray. He looked from Marcus's desk, to David's, to Maria's empty office. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a coup. The 3 most critical pillars of our firm's operational and creative wings had just declared their independence. The talent was walking out the door, and he had no idea why. He came to my desk, his voice a strained whisper. You have to talk to them, Reed. They respect you. This is your team. You have to convince them to stay. Offer them more money, a promotion, whatever it takes. I feigned a look of grave concern. This is a shock, Kevin. I can't imagine what's prompted it, but these are proud, talented people. If they've made up their minds, I'm not sure more money is the answer. Maybe we should be asking ourselves why they feel the need to look for challenges elsewhere. My calm, reasonable tone seemed to infuriate him even more. He was looking for an ally in his panic, and instead he found a mirror reflecting his own failure of leadership. He was a general whose entire officer corps had just deserted, and he was left alone in the command tent, wondering why no one wanted to follow him into battle. His desperate counter-manipulation began that afternoon. He called an emergency all-hands meeting, excluding the 3 who had resigned. He stood before the remaining staff, a group of mostly junior designers and administrative staff, and put on the performance of a lifetime. He was the betrayed leader, the captain of a ship being abandoned by a few disloyal sailors. He talked about loyalty, about the Sterling and Thorne family, about how adversity would only make them stronger. It was a transparent, pathetic attempt to stop the bleeding. I could see the skepticism on the faces of the junior staff. They knew who did the real work. They knew whose desks they went to when they had a real architectural problem, and those people were leaving. His last desperate move was to try and regain control of the Sterling account. He called Richard Sterling's office to try and smooth things over before the big presentation. He was told by Richard's long-serving and fiercely loyal executive assistant that Mr. Sterling's schedule was full, but that he was very much looking forward to hearing from Reed. The message was clear. The king on the chessboard had declared his allegiance. Kevin was checked. He just didn't know yet that the game was already over. He spent the rest of the day in his office, on the phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He was likely calling other clients, trying to accelerate his plan, trying to poach anyone he could before the ship sank entirely. But it was too late. The story was already out. A firm that loses its top 3 talents in the span of an hour isn't a firm in transition, it's a firm in collapse. Trust is the foundation of any structure. Once it's gone, the whole thing is coming down, and the demolition had just begun. The day of vindication arrived as I knew it would, on the back of Kevin's own hubris. It was the morning of the big presentation to the Sterling Developments Board. Kevin had insisted on coming, despite Richard's clear preference for me to lead it. He couldn't stand to be sidelined. He had to be in the room to try and reclaim some semblance of control. He spent the morning pacing in his office like a caged animal. Just before we were set to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. "The package is on its way to your office. It should arrive within the hour." The package was the culmination of 6 weeks of meticulous work, the final, bound report of her forensic audit. It was a complete, documented history of his crime. Kevin and I rode the elevator down in suffocating silence. He was trying to project an aura of command, adjusting his tie, squaring his shoulders. But I could see the frantic energy behind his eyes. He was a man playing a losing hand, bluffing for all he was worth. The presentation was in the Sterling Tower's top-floor boardroom, a space I had designed. The view of the city was spectacular. Richard Sterling and his board of directors were seated around a massive granite table. Richard gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod as I walked in. He barely acknowledged Kevin. I led the presentation. I didn't just show them the new designs Marcus and I had developed. I told them the story behind them. I spoke of architectural integrity, of creating a space that would serve the community for a century, not just look good in a brochure for a decade. I spoke with a passion and authority that Kevin had tried to convince me I didn't possess. I wasn't selling them a building, I was inviting them to be part of a legacy. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Richard Sterling looked around the table at his board members, who were all nodding in approval. Then he looked directly at Kevin. "Kevin," he said, his voice flat and cold. "I have to be honest. For the past year, I've felt this firm was losing its way. I was seriously considering taking our business elsewhere. This presentation from Reed is the only thing that stopped me." He paused, letting the words land. "Effective today, Sterling Development's contract is exclusively with Reed Thorne. Whatever he decides to do next, we're with him. As for you, I believe we have nothing further to discuss. It was a public execution, clean, swift, and brutal." Kevin's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but no words came out. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. He finally understood. This wasn't a random series of events. It was a coordinated, deliberate checkmate. We rode back to the office in that same silent elevator, but the dynamic had been irrevocably altered. He wasn't the powerful partner anymore. He was just a man who had been fired by his biggest client. As we stepped out onto our floor, his assistant met us, holding a thick, courier-delivered envelope. My name was on it. I knew what it was. I walked to Kevin's office. He followed me in, closing the door. The mask was gone. His face was a mess of panic and rage. "What did you do?" he sputtered. "You poisoned him against me. You sabotaged me." I didn't answer. I calmly opened the envelope from Elena. Inside were two identical, beautifully bound reports. I placed one on his pristine mahogany desk. The cover simply read, Forensic Financial Audit of Sterling and Thorne, LLP. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? That, I said, my voice steady and quiet, is a detailed evidence-backed accounting of the $30,000 you embezzled from this firm through a shell company called Render Lux. It includes bank statements, copies of the fraudulent invoices you created, and a complete timeline of your plan to use our money and our portfolio to launch a competing firm. His color drained away completely. He sank into his chair, his hands trembling. Then I placed a second document on the desk next to the audit. It was a single-page invoice, printed on my personal letterhead. It was a bill made out to him. The items were listed clearly, * fraudulent transfers to Render Lux Studios, $30,000 * cost of forensic audit, $25, * breach of fiduciary duty and reputational damages, $250,000 * total due, $305,000. You have two choices, Kevin, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the granite in that boardroom table. Choice A is you pay that bill. You will sign a partnership dissolution agreement I have had drafted, which cedes all firm assets, including all client contracts and intellectual property, to me. You will walk out of this office with nothing but your personal effects. You will also sign a non-compete clause so restrictive that you will not be able to practice architecture in this state or any adjoining state for the next 10 years. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. Choice B is you don't pay the bill, in which case this second copy of the audit, I tapped the report still in my hand, gets messengered to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. Given your history, and the premeditated nature of this, I imagine they will be very interested. You'll be facing a grand jury indictment for felony fraud. Your choice. He stared at the invoice, then at the audit, then at me. The charismatic, untouchable Kevin Thorne was gone. In his place was a cornered, terrified man. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by the grim weight of reality. He had gambled one last time, and he had lost everything. You won't, he whispered, his voice cracking. We were friends, Reed. Partners. We were, I said, and I forgave you once. This time there is no forgiveness. There is only accounting. He sat there for a long time, the silence broken only by his own ragged breathing. Finally, with a shuddering sigh of defeat, he reached for a pen and pulled the invoice towards him. He knew he was beaten. The new workplace reality had arrived. Sterling and Thorne was dead, but from its ashes, something new, something honest, was about to be built. In the end, he signed everything. The dissolution papers, the confession of liability, the ironclad non-compete. He paid the bill, liquidating whatever was left in that brokerage account he'd been funding with my money. He walked out of that office an hour later with a single cardboard box, not even making eye contact with the few remaining staff. He just vanished, and ghost erased from his own story. The next day, I called a meeting with the entire remaining staff. I laid out the truth, not the gory details of the betrayal, but the simple fact that Kevin was gone, and the firm was moving in a new direction. Then I announced the formation of the Thorne Group, and my first official act as founder was to call Marcus, David, and Maria, and offer them positions not just as employees, but as founding partners. There was no hesitation. They accepted on the spot. Our new office isn't as large or as flashy as the old one. We're leaner, more focused. The mahogany desks and skyline views are gone, replaced by collaborative workspaces and walls covered in sketches and blueprints. The energy is different. It's not the nervous, high-strung energy of a sales pitch, but the focused, creative hum of people who love the work. Richard Sterling was true to his word. He became not just our anchor client, but a strategic advisor. My name is on the door, but the firm is built on a foundation of shared respect and a simple, powerful idea. Competence is the only thing that matters. Sometimes I think about Kevin. I don't feel anger anymore, or even satisfaction. I mostly feel a kind of detached pity. He was a man who built his entire identity on a facade, and when the facade crumbled, there was nothing left underneath. He mistook charisma for character, salesmanship for substance. Trust is the foundation of any structure, and he'd spent his life building on sand. So why am I telling you all this? Because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are thousands of you out there, in every industry, who are the quiet engine in the machine. You're the one who does the work, who solves the problems, who stays late to make sure things are done right, while someone else takes the credit and the bonuses. You are the foundation that everyone takes for granted. My story isn't really about revenge, it's about reclamation. It's about understanding your own value, especially when the people around you are determined to underestimate it. It's about realizing that true power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one who knows how to build the room in the first place. Never let anyone else write your story or take credit for your work. Your competence has a value that can't be measured on a balance sheet, and you should never ever give it away for free. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your own experiences. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for listening.